Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Just Two Dads with my co-host and partner, Mr. Shawn Francis. I am Brian Altunian, and today on our Just Two Dads podcast, we're going to be talking about friendship and brotherhood. That's almost combine them into one word. Friendship and brotherhood among men, and it's going to be a lively conversation. I hope that you'll be joining us here on Just Two Dads. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Just Two Dads. I am Brian Altunian. I want to thank you all for tuning in. I don't know what episode number, Shawn, what episode are we at? I think we're almost at episode 70 now in our Just Two Dads podcast.
It's like 67, I believe.
67, which is amazing. So I want to thank you all. If you're catching us on any of our Facebook pages now, please enter your comments, say hello. Feel free to comment on anything that we're talking about or any other subject matter that you'd like us to discuss. If you're not catching us live on Facebook, but you're catching us on our YouTube channel, hello, welcome. Hopefully you'll see the comments too. And feel free to subscribe, tell your friends, share the content if it's of interest to people that you know. We'd love to have your participation. If you're hearing us on audio podcasts on Google, Apple, Pandora, Spotify, iHeartRadio, welcome. Hope that this is compelling content for you, as we're just two dads having a conversation about life as fathers of children with special needs or additional needs, we like to say. And finally, if you're catching us on WSTX AM radio in the U.S. Virgin Islands, welcome again to our show. We're looking forward to seeing you all in person in a short period of time. I'm just looking forward to get down to the U.S. Virgin Islands. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And this month we are launching our podcast on a Roku channel. Empower Media Communications will be doing a soft launch here in the month of December, and eventually we'll be doing a formal launch in January of 2022. So welcome. I hope that, again, this is a content that covers a lot of information about the special needs community, and generally we like to highlight and focus those people who are working and doing things in the special needs community or have taken their situation and converted it into doing something, making a difference in the lives of those around them. So again, thank you all for joining us. There's Joe. Hello, Joe. My daughter Joe joins us on a fairly regular basis. It's always great to see her. And without further ado, I'm feeling great, fired up. There's a lot going on as we end the year 2021. Shawn Francis, my partner in Thrive. How are you doing today, my friend? How you feeling? Let me guess. You feeling blessed?
I feel blessed and I feel grateful, as I always do. But at the same time, without going into specifics, because I'm sure we can pick and choose examples around us. There's just so many people that it struck me how many people need some form of prayer or thought or hope. There's a lot of life being lost around us. Either someone I know or somebody dealing with illness or just a lot of that's taken place, which falls in line with our topic for today, because when you think of how short life is and how much of a promise tomorrow is not, how important is friendship? How important is friendship? Friendship is based on having mutual interest. So if you have friendship amongst, just like, women have, you have girls groups and girlfriends and things of that sort, because only a woman knows what it's really like to be a woman. By the same token, only a man knows what it's like to be a man. And so men having friendships and brotherhood amongst each other is important and crucial. If as a dad, you're a dad to a child with special needs or a caregiver, that's that's a little different. We like to say that there is no such thing as special needs. There are only human needs. Everyone needs to know that they're loved, that they're seen, that they're heard, and that they matter. But if you're a subgroup of a group, so to speak, that human condition is only amplified. And so it's interesting because right now I see a lot on social media about men embracing the idea of friendship and sharing with other men. Just think about it. Just the idea of telling a friend, hey, I love you. I think that I'm at a stage in my life. I've always done that, but I waste little time in doing that. Period. You happen to be the same way. So like I said, one of the things that let me know how we're connected is that I have conversations with you as a male, where one of the few other males that I have that conversation with is my brother, and that's where it's not strange to end a conversation with, "All right, talk to you later, man. Love you." That's better to do that than to have regret and not having not expressed that. And as a man, there's this thing about being, machismo and whatnot. So those things don't necessarily get expressed. But especially as a dad, and especially as a dad to, a child with special needs, you need to be encouraged to be vulnerable, because there's strength in that vulnerability, and those things are important, huge.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I was just having a conversation with a friend who, when you kind of define the word friendship, it's tough. It's nebulous. It means something different for everybody. We all think we have a lot of friends. Some people think that their Facebook friends are their friends, right? Like there's sort of we have this now sort of a false image of what a friend means. But this person said to me, the thing I appreciate about our friendship is that I can actually just be me around you. There's no pretense. There's no agenda. There's nothing. It's just I can actually just be free to be me. And I think that's at the end of the day what it's really all about. Listen, in the last several years, we've had this conversation. There's been a lot of divisiveness and a lot of people who seem to be, we're taking positions with in certain areas, whether it's politics or as it relates to the vaccine or, a number of things. And we find out where, we don't say certain things. But there used to be a joke, right, during the holidays, that you never talk about politics and religion at the dinner table.
Right.
And I think that separation has really just been exacerbated lately. So being able to just have a conversation with somebody who, you're not being judged, you can have different opinions and know that your friendship will extend beyond those differences of opinion. And frankly, I think having a different opinion and still being able to maintain the friendship is healthy. And so I'm with you, again, identifying what friendship means and brotherhood. Men don't generally say, we've had this conversation. I think you just mentioned it before we went live. Is it okay for men to say "I love you" to one another? I use it all. I say it all the time because I'm kind of all about love. Love and empathy. That's kind of that's generally my thing. And so I always say, "I love you, man. Hey, man, I love you." And I don't say. I mean, it sounds like I say it casually, but I don't say that to everybody, right? I say it to people that I have a deep care and affinity for. So
right.
I just think that if I think men don't say those kinds of things for whatever reason, cultural reasons, machismo or macho, we don't say "I love you" to other men. We don't hug. We don't do any of that stuff. I do it all the time because my dad was very affectionate growing up. My dad always hugged and kissed us, made sure that we all did that. So there was no weird thing around that.
And that's everything, because that's where you get the impression of that from. And it's funny because growing up, my dad was affectionate in that he'd put his arm around us, or he'd, horseplay, wrestle, or whatever have you. But he would talk about, the idea of I do such and such because, I love you. But to say "I love you" as a form of expression, within the last month and a half or something like that, he said that to me on the phone, and I don't remember if he said it first or said it in response to me saying it. But this is a testament to my dad. Usually, if someone says that's the first time that was ever said, that's a problem, because it means that you've gone through your whole life never hearing that from your dad, or never knowing if that's how he really feels. I have never once had a doubt as to whether or not my father loves me, ever. And the reaction that I felt when he said that is a testament to that, because we're getting off the phone and he says that, and I get off the phone and I'm like, man, it's the first time he said that. As opposed to some big emotional whatever, because there's no doubt whatsoever. By the same token, my brother and I have a friend, that he's a friend of both of ours from the Virgin Islands as well. And, he's like a brother to us. And particularly because of some health challenges, in our family that we've discussed. That's why I think when I got off the phone with him, his response to me was, "Love you too, man." And he had never said that before. And we've been friends for 30 years,
Yeah.
So those, so it's a matter of, being used to that. And then what I would do is, because I wanted to make sure that I didn't just, abuse that word, because people are like, "Oh my gosh, I love so-and-so. Oh yeah, I just love so-and-so." Just like you meet someone 5 minutes later, "I want you to meet a friend of mine." Everybody's your friend on a rain, when the sun is out. You don't know who your friends are until there's a rainy day. So by the same token, don't want to just throw that word around. But if you stop and think about it, especially if somebody listening happens to be of the same mind, where they're like, "Well, I don't know if someone's really my friend. I don't know if I really love that person." It's not about the quantity, it's about the quality. You can have conversation with someone over a very short period of time, and if you know you could count on that person at 2 o'clock in the morning, if you have a situation where it's someone that you just need to talk to, or if you need help with a flat tire, if you know that you can be yourself with that person and they accept you for who you are while supporting all that you can be, that person is your friend. And and if you haven't gone through challenges, I don't have to know someone for too long to be able to say, "Yeah, I love you." But at the same time, the other thing is, I love all mankind anyway. So that's just an extension of it anyway. I even love people that are doing, evil, so to speak, just as a human being, on the planet. My love for them might be manifested in nothing other than my prayer for them to, whatever have you, as opposed to us grabbing pizza or something like that. But it's fairly simple. And I'm saying that as someone who has mastered the art of complication. But like, wait a minute, do I love that person? Should I? And me, I can get too granular for my own good.
Yeah. No, but that's true. Again, I think our expression is Sean Hall comments, "I love pizza." Loving pizza, and loving your
They
friends
go hand in hand. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's a different kind of love, Sean Hall. I'm not sure, but I'm just saying. I think it's different. But I think that and again, by the way, this conversation jumped into love. It doesn't have to. Friendship and brotherhood. You can have friendship and brotherhood without saying "I love you." But I think the idea, and in any kind of relationship, is giving of yourself to one another, whether it's your time, your effort, your energy, your emotion, your space, your shoulder to cry, whatever it is, right? There's an act of generosity that comes with friendship. Otherwise, it's just an encounter with somebody, just another human being, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you give of yourself, and there's like, again, if you look at any kind of relationship, even a relationship with your spouse or your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, or just somebody else in your family, you're giving of yourself. There's give and take on both sides. And so I think that anytime that you're in friendship, relationship, it's the generosity of spirit. It's the generosity. I always find, and first of all, let me just say this. I think that the things that we like about other people, and I think I heard this at somewhere, those things that we like about other people are the things we like about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And those things that we don't like about other people are those things that we don't like about ourselves that we'd like to change. Right. So if you see somebody, you go, "Oh, that person is selfish. That person's a narcissist." That's probably an area that that you have the capability of doing, of being as well, that you would like to eliminate or correct, or one that you're not proud of. So I always admire folks who have the generosity of spirit, right? Who give of themselves. And I feel that that's, an area that I would like, if I'm listing those characteristics of myself that I feel positive about. I know that that's one thing about me that I like. I try to be giving in that space. And I think a lot of times, sometimes it's misinterpreted if somebody's not used to having that in their space. They don't really don't know how to receive it. And so, and I just went down a rat hole myself. So, but the idea that if we, I'm always drawn to people who are giving people, where they're giving, again, time, energy, focus, who give back, who their thought is of others before themselves.
Right.
Because I think that that's something that, again, I think about myself. So,
Yeah.
anyways, that's just my comment on that. I think if people look at others and go, oh, I hadn't really thought about that. Those elements, those characteristics that they like about other people are probably characteristics they like about themselves.
Yeah, I think it takes an exceptionally evolved person to, well, I shouldn't say that. I take that back, because you don't have to necessarily be evolved to see something in someone that you wish was a quality that you had, identify that it's something you admire, and as a result, be drawn to that person for both good and bad reasons, right? That's where influence comes into play. And that, you can grow and develop into a better version of yourself as a result of that, or be led down the wrong road by hanging out with someone that, where the qualities aren't necessarily the best. But I think that the more true you can be to yourself, the more of yourself that you can be with someone, the greater value there is on that friendship. And when you think of it, just like I've always said, I've heard these words, I have shared before, which is, if the world were more childlike and less childish, the world would be a better place. And there's a bunch of different examples of that. Here's one of them. If you take children that are young enough, before they've been influenced by the world, you put a bunch of them together and they're going to play. Either they like each other or they don't. And while you're on one hand searching for a sense of self, you haven't gotten to the pretend phase yet. You're not trying to win somebody over in terms of friendship. So the friendships that you have, when you're young, you especially, as I said, if you go back to when you're like really young, you're as plain and as stripped and pure, as bare as can be. This is who I am. So as a result, when you get older and you find yourself doing some unconscious pretending, so to speak, because there's certain things you should wear, should do, or whatever have you. When you can be around someone and be your complete self, right? There's greater value in that. And that just doesn't happen too much, because most of us don't even realize that we're pretending.
Well, I think it's tied to, I think you're right. First of all, it's tied to our experiences in life. So I remember taking a many years ago, 20 years ago now. Oh my God, more than that, 25, 27 years ago, a long time ago, a self-development program. And I remember one of the speakers leading the conversation, and this stuck with me. It's almost 30 years that this has stuck with me, where she said, when you're young and you're young and impressionable, first of all, you kind of live in the world where the world is your oyster. It's your swimming pool, right? And so her whole thing is like, the world is so big. I can be anything I want. I can be an astronaut. I can be Santa Claus. I can be anything. And I'm just swimming in this massive pool of possibility. And then, I do something because I'm doing what I do. And, and my mom slaps my hand, and I didn't know that I couldn't do that. I thought that I could just swim in the world of life. Okay, so maybe I'll swim over here, but I won't do that thing that got me slapped, right? So that's okay. I'll swimming, and I'm swimming, and then, then I'm going to school, and I see somebody who I think I'm going to be friends with, to your point, and then that person doesn't like me, and like, well, maybe it was something that I did, and so maybe my pool is a little bit smaller. Maybe I won't do those things, and our behavior kind of gets modified a bit by societal, what happens in either friendships or parenting or some teacher or something. You get up in front of the room and you answer a question, and the class laughs at you, and you're like, oh, that kind of hurts, and you're like, but I'm going to swim. It's in a smaller pool, and then you get a little bit older, and then I remember I was in elementary school and I asked a girl out. I didn't even know what it meant to ask out, but my friend said, you should ask out Lisa. I'll never forget her name, by the way, Lisa Breweiler, loved her. You should ask out Lisa. I was in 6th grade, and I remember walking with her, and we were on campus. We kind of came together like this, and I said, hi, will you go out with me? And she said, no. And I said, okay. And we just both went different ways. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore, right? I'm not going to ask anybody out anymore. So my world got, getting smaller and smaller. And eventually you get slapped down by so many things. Like your swimming pool is about this big, and you're swimming in a pool that's this big, and you don't really want to get out there in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Our behavior gets modified, right? And so those things we need to learn, right? So what happens is our self-expression gets limited, right? How we express ourselves in the world becomes limited to what you should or should not do, how men should treat one another, how they should be with one another, how a friendship what it should look like. The world of should. If we could eliminate the word should from our vocabulary, the world would be a much better place, because who dictates what should be, right?
Right.
Outside forces that may not have any impact on anything, but just, somebody else's friends.
And when you focus a whole lot on what you should do, if you're not careful, you just, spiritually should all over yourself.
Right. Right. That's what they say, right? Eventually you're going to should all over yourself. Yeah. That's a terrible thing to say, but it's true.
It's interesting. So then if you take the component of, okay, so you're a dad, you're a male, you're a husband, and you have a child, your child has delays or something of that sort, or there's a catastrophic injury, there's a diagnosis, then if you think about it, let me ask you this out of curiosity.
Yeah.
I don't know too many people, I'm sure there's some, but most of the people that I know, male or female, that belong to parent support groups or anything like that, and they're a parent to a child with special needs, they kind of stumble into the group. Not too many of them, especially men, tend to raise their hand in the proverbial room and ask, does anybody know a group of parents that kind of come together where they, uplift each other or anything? Does anybody know that? I don't think that ends up being sought, generally speaking, and especially amongst men. The whole thing is not like, hey, I need help, or I need to connect with someone that might know what this experience is like, or someone that I can ask about what the experience is like. So as a result, men still operate from such an inward position and internalize many things. And like you said, whether or not we do that is dictated by how we're raised. And so what happens is you're always on. Is the camera on? Am I on? This is who I'm supposed to be, who I should be, as opposed to who you really are. Especially, I shouldn't say especially as a man, because those things apply to women too. But being vulnerable or emotionally available is not typically and traditionally part of the male experience, and it should be.
Should it?
Yes, it ought to be. It serves us best when it is.
I remember having a conversation with my older brother. My older brother is a very successful businessman, and I don't remember what we were talking, and we were talking about something in the boardroom, and I was telling him that I had made a lighthearted comment or a joke in the room, and he said, you're never going to be successful if you go into a boardroom with a bunch of levity. Like, people aren't going to take you seriously. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, is that true? I wonder if that's, and I will tell you this, for a year, at least a year in work environments, I was very serious. I would never make, offhanded comments. I would never, because my brother told me that that's not the way boardrooms go. That's not the way boardrooms operate. Now, by the way, there's some truth to what he said, because in certain environments where business is being handled, and you've got and you've got a strict deadline, timeline, blah, 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 and you've got stuff to get through. Sometimes there's not room for discussion that goes outside of the directed conversation. But I have to tell you how inauthentic I felt in all of that. Mm-hmm. In a corporate environment, Shawn Hall, that's right, just corporate. In a corporate environment, I thought, that's not how people act, right? And if that's the way it is, I don't want any part of it. I remember thinking that. And then when I was in a room, obviously you don't want to slip into, off, jokes and do stuff in an inappropriate way. But I thought to myself, like, that's one person's opinion. That's somebody's opinion about it. And by the way, that may work for him, but that's not who I am. That's not how people know me. People know me because of my ability to be relatable, my ability to, and you and I have had this conversation as well. When I speak, whether it's in a boardroom or in a meeting or with a whole group of people or, a couple hundred people on a Zoom call, I am conscious of the listening of the people that I'm addressing. And so I do my best to speak into their listening in such a way that, and part of that comes with experience of knowing how to read a room, right? Knowing how to read the other person. But, and again, when we kind of went off topic here, but the idea that somebody else told me how I should operate in a way that's not who I am from an authentic perspective. Again, another slap down of, you should do this and you should not do that. And, that's not what it is. But I will tell you, I mean, if you look at the landscape of corporate America, those people who do things outside of what the norm are those that actually are standing out. Elon Musk doesn't do what other people do. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't do what other people. Bill Gates didn't do what other people did, right? I mean, and by the way, you and I have had this conversation. All three of those guys, I just pulled them out of the air, but all three of those guys have some significant cognitive atypical way of processing information. Elon Musk has said publicly he has Asperger's. I know Zuckerberg has them, and I would tell you that Bill Gates has something diagnosed or not, but whether it's ADHD or some other component, maybe something along the autism spectrum, but that those folks don't see the world and process the world the way neurotypical people do. Again, I just pulled those people out of, I would say Steve Jobs had something as well. You look at those unique people who are making a difference in the world and have for the last 20 years and are making a difference in the world today. And I would say that they don't follow traditional social mores around how you're supposed to operate in a boardroom. Right. So that just goes to show you that, the great thing about being a parent of a child that has, some element of special needs, whether they're medically complex or whatever, is that we have an awareness of the different ways that people process the world.
You're probably better at reading a room.
And better at reading a room, like how Elijah processes the world, your sensitivity and awareness of the world and how people are taking in information is much different than most people, because you process it. I'm going to jump out and say this. You probably have tried to make sense of how Elijah processes information, so which already requires you to think about it differently than you process information, right? So your awareness of how information is processed is much more heightened. You have a heightened awareness around that. So, so that being said, right, when it comes to relationships, how we deal with one another, the more open you are and the more empathetic, the more sensitive you are to how the world's processing, makes you, just a different kind of human being, different kind of relationship, and more open to, a relationship where you can be generous in your heart and spirit.
Yeah. And questions are just so much more, the questions are always just so much more powerful than statements too, in doing that, so let me ask you this. So would you say that you have a fair amount of good quality relationship amongst male friends in a sense of brotherhood in your life?
Yeah, I do. I have had people comment. Listen, I've had businesses that have been successful and I've had businesses that have not been successful. And I've had people comment that my relationships with the outside world in both of those companies I'm going to say that they're exactly the same, but they're pretty close. My relationship and people I dealt with in the companies that were not successful are almost as good or just as good as those where we've had success. And so to me, that says, I try to maintain relationships, across the board. And by the way, I'm not great. I'm not perfect at it. I have screwed up some relationships, and I have made mistakes, and I have suffered, personally and internally in some areas where I have made mistakes. I can always improve on how I have relationships with certain people. But in general, I'd say that I have a really good relationship with a lot of my male friends in my life. And by the way, I have a great relationship with female friends in my life as well, because I think because of who I am. I think you and I were just, I know your question was leading to something, but I was just going to say,
No, that's okay.
in 2 weeks, I'm going to spend some time on the weekend with friends that I met when I was in kindergarten over 50 years ago.
Yeah.
People that I have, some of those who I have maintained a relationship, or I have, or we've gotten together. In fact, I was just talking to one of them the other day, my friend Michael, and we said, he said to me, oh, I've talked to Jason and he's just like you. I pick up the phone and have a conversation, and it's like time never, like there's no break in time. It was like when we were kids and we just pick up the conversation where we left off. And so again, it's one of those things that I'm proud of. When I see men like you that have good relationships with people, I admire it, because I know that that's the thing in me that I appreciate.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I just think that, I don't know, all those things are important. And it's funny, I think back to certain periods in my life where I withdrew sort of, a bit. I've had some of those times too. And I've had more. It was just funny. I was just thinking about this the other day. I've had a lot of alone time or periods in my life, and very few lonely ones. One of my greatest pastimes used to be going to the movies, alone. When I was single, I had a job working in a warehouse. Um, and this is back in the 80s, and my days off were Sunday and Tuesday. And the Sunday, I would end work at midnight on Saturday night. So a big portion of the day off on Sunday might be spent sleeping or something like that.
Right.
So
Right.
it wasn't, so when I had the day like just to myself, I enjoyed, you know, the time to myself and the solitude and that kind of thing. But I've been blessed with not a lot of time feeling, lonely. So alone and lonely are just, two different things. But I think, most people, especially even for people that aren't quote unquote people, persons, and they like to, I don't like people, I need my time alone and blah, blah, blah. Truth of the matter is, at the end of the day, I think for most of us, we need each other more than we would ever realize.
Agree.
We really, really do. And sometimes, it's just good to know that somebody's there, not, it's not always about interaction as well. It's just nice to know that you're not alone,
Yeah. It's funny that you say that. I was thinking about my older brother. My older brother was one of those guys that loved to be alone. And, if there was an opportunity when we were younger as to the family to go do something, he would prefer to stay back, stay home, read a book, stay by himself, let the family go.
Mm-hmm.
Even as he's gotten older, he has 3 adult children now too. They spend the time together when they can. They're kind of spread out now across the country, and when they get together, it's good and it's valuable and solid. But he still would have a preference of, I'd still rather go to a place in Park City and just sit by myself, have a fire, or read a bunch of books, and just not talk to anybody. That's his preference. However, he's so well loved. I mean, not just by his family. He was a professor at a university in Austin, Texas. He's just recently moved to Newport, Rhode Island, where he's now the associate provost of a university.
Mm-hmm.
His colleagues, his students, his business partners, just glowing love. I mean, overflowing love and admiration for him in their communication about him. And he would rather spend time totally on his own by himself if he had his brother. So it's interesting because, to your point, right, you can have that desire and comfort being totally alone and not interacting with people, and still be loved by a whole bunch of people. And I'm going to say it's because when those folks are with people, he and I are so opposite. When you are with people, the quality of the interaction is received as something special, whether he intends it or not, right? I mean, I'm sure he's like, I'd rather be by myself, but I'm here now, so I'm just going to give what I can.
He's got to be someone that's present, because if he's that withdrawn yet that revered,
100%.
that can only take place if you're that present. Because if not, then you're one of those prickly people where people are just like, and
don't want to be around. Yeah, but he's not a curmudgeon-y old, fuddy-duddy. Joe, don't tell Uncle David I'm talking about him. But the reality is, it's a thing that I love about him is just his ability to master, if you will, on any environment, and the generosity that he shares is so well received that people love him. And again, I know for him, I know he'd rather sit in the back of the room, not talk to anybody if he had his way. We used to joke about it when we shared best man duties at my younger brother's wedding, and I was trying to get him to get up in front of the room and do something fun. I know that's not a surprise for people who know me. I'm like, we had a whole skit laid out. I had the whole thing, scripted and this whole thing. And he was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to do that. I'll raise a toast and that's it. That's all I'm going to do. I'm like, no, let's do the toast like this. And then I'll come in and then you do this. And then, I want to have a good time. And he was like, nope. So, but that's him. And I find that to be so funny. And yet I think that his speech was like probably more memorable than anything that I did anyways, because again, when he's there, he's totally present. How do we get on this subject? I don't remember where we were going with this, but just the idea that people who, when we think, here's the thing I think that men need to understand. We impact people whether we intend to or not.
That's it. Go ahead, finish with that. I got a thought to add to that, because already.
Hold that. Yeah. So comment on that, but I was going to say that when we consciously try to give and we consciously seek out, sometimes it's an uncomfortable thing because sometimes it's not intentional, right? And I think that if we could sort of, knowing that we impact people no matter what our intent, if we could just sort of break down again the shoulds and find the common ground for us to share with one another, and know that we're going to give and also receive, again, barriers broken down, lots of opportunity, as Shawn Hall's commenting here, brotherly love. I mean, that is really what it's about. I don't know, Shawn, if you're talking about me and my brother or just talking about what we're talking about now, but brotherly love, it really is a thing. You were going to comment on, so I don't want to have you lose that thought.
I was going to say, I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you about myself, is that because of the comment I made earlier about liking alone time and being able to kind of, disappear in a moment to myself, there are times where there was a period of my life, especially, where I was like, I don't really want to be bothered with people. There'd be moments like that, and where I just kind of like, and so what happens is you grow, you evolve, you become a parent, you have a child that's diagnosed with, in my case, autism, in Elijah's case at the age of 3. And without having this real identifiable moment and a conscious thought, you know what? There are probably other parents out there that don't know where to turn. I shall start a parents group and I shall do so. I'm going to, it's like when I think back to how I evolved into, being part of any of those groups or anything like that, it's almost like I'm not sure how that happened. It's really a very organic, evolution. But I remember that when in first doing that and encountering people, we always say that who a person is based on their experience, and those experiences not only form who they are, but can also dictate the manner in which they deal with a diagnosis that their child or loved one may have. And everybody's situation is a little different. But I found that I had, again, this might surprise you, little patience or tolerance for a situation where engaging with someone where all they could focus on was their problem, and it's just negative. And I had to sit back and stop and think, of what you just said, which is that, you know what, we impact people whether we think it or not. So I'm not, it's not just that I'm some noble person and, you know, my words might impact someone, so therefore I'm going to uplift because that is who I am, Captain Kumbaya. It's not that. It's just having enough consciousness to realize that no matter what you're going through, you have the ability to impact people in a big way. And if you're really conscious about the fact that we're all the sum total of our experiences, then you have to remember that when you interact with someone where it seems like all they ever talk about is their problems, because you don't know what they've experienced to cause
Yeah.
them to be who and what they are. And then at the end of the day too, if you're really sincere about embracing people and, you know, you have a group of support and that kind of thing, again, we're talking about men and dads here, then you have to understand that some people are not going to come to the table or the party with the most positive attitude. And if there's any chance that you're going to enlighten them or add value to their time, you know, on the planet, if you appreciate being able to do that, whether it's one person, no matter how great or small, then you got to be willing to accept that there's sometimes that your energy is not necessarily going to be received as well, because that's another thing too, because some people are just like, I just don't have the time for that, you know. And that's understandable too. That too, again, is somebody being the sum total of their experiences. But you can also pick and choose where the energy is exchanged versus being robbed or sapped, and at the same time engage in brotherhood and some kind of fellowship to uplift people too.
Yeah. Listen, you know, of course, we're all the sum of all of our experiences. I think for men in general, the idea, and I think if you've just listened, if this is the first time you've ever caught our podcast, you're like, what are these two doofuses talking about? But we started doing this podcast because you and I enjoy the discourse. We enjoy the conversation. We're totally cool going, man, when my first meeting with my neurologist, we had a diagnosis. It was a kick in the gut, and I thought I was less than, and it impacted my marriage. Like we're not afraid to have those conversations, and I think that that's the thing that, again, if you're just hearing this for the first time, Shawn and I have been having this conversation for 5-6 years, and we share the experiences, and so having this outlet to be able to have these ongoing conversations, people aren't surprised to hear it come from some of us, but for other men, it's not a natural place to go. So what we have done and continue to do is to try to provide access to resources so people know that there are support. There's support out there, whether it's moms or people who IEPs or attorneys or financial support or estate planning, any of that kind of stuff that can just round out, but just from an emotional support place where it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay for us to, to share these things. It's okay to be uncomfortable in it and know that we're not going to be judgy. We're not going to judge. We're not going to, that we've been through it. We get it. And while it may be the sum of your experiences, then there's a new experience to add to the sum of who you are. And I just think it changes the world. Again, we talk about, being seen, being heard, being gotten. People want to know that they're gotten, that people get them. Like some of the things that people say, the worst, it's one thing to be loved and or hated, but the worst thing is to have somebody just feel indifferent. Somebody said, this, I think this about you. And then the worst response to get back is, I don't even think about you. Right. It's like a sense of indifference, or like they're invisible, or you don't matter, all of that. Right. And so it doesn't have to be one or the other. It's often better to be one or the other than to not have, than to have indifference. And so again, we create this environment just for people to have a conversation around, even those things that are uncomfortable and that don't feel right, because this will add to the experience. And there are men support groups, and there are, places where, men can find, in fact, where they often occur at a sports bar, right? Men will get together at a sports bar, have, TV on the background, so they don't have to be, 100% present before they can be 100% present, but I think that more of this, more of these kind of conversations are needed and are welcomed and encouraged, and for men to participate. And we have Shawn Hall, who is a partner with us in this podcast, who is in Hawaii, and we tell him all the time how much we love him and who he is in the world and who he is for his family. And we started in this conversation based on what we do professionally, which is provide financial support for families. And Shawn Hall is in that business with us as well. And I know for me, so I'm not going to speak for the two Shawns, but for me, the work that we do here is more tied to my heart and the crusade of who I am and who I want to be in the world than any of the work we do in the financial space. The financial sector is great because we do provide support and help, but I know that we're tied to, and I know that Shawn Hall has expressed, Shawn, you can comment here, but has expressed that this also provides that sense of brotherhood and togetherness and partnership. And we value that because we value that in each other. And we know that those are the things about ourselves that we like. Again, I don't speak for you, Shawn Francis, but
yeah, you did though. You did. My sentiments exactly couldn't be more correct. And, that's a whole nother topic, but there's something to be said for your purpose. What is it that really, really drives you? I've heard it said recently, you can be really good at something and not necessarily love it too,
it's true.
And all of that stuff is tied to the fact that it boils down to the fact that, I think it's 72,000 hours or something like that. That's the amount of hours that the average life consists of. Right. And that's if you get average. So you don't know what you're going to get. So you want to, know that you let other people know that, that they matter. And if you're not raised with that, allow yourself to explore that, because there's a great feeling in doing that. That's another form of brotherhood and camaraderie as well, too. Especially if you're able to be there for somebody that might not see something, in themselves. And to be honest, so we have a men's group within our firm that has been around now for about 2 years.
2 years. Yep.
2 years. And prior to joining that group and leading one of the teams, on the group, if you had talked to me about the idea of we're going to start a men's group, and I was like, I'd be like, what, a bunch of guys that like could be clean shaven 1 minute and 5 minutes later they have full grown beards because they just push it out on demand and they chop wood and wear red checkered flannel shirts like the brawny guy and smoke cigars and fish and drink scotch. That ain't me. And it's not, but it's also an indication of how you have to stop and think, okay, here's what I know that to be. Is that all there is to that per se, and, you just, as your path, as you take a walk each day and, your time on the planet, it just makes sense to be able to, you want to be got. There's great value in that. And you want to let people know that you get them, or at least the desire to be quote unquote gotten.
Yeah. And I think, the only way to do that is to, and I may be wrong here, and psychologists may, have a comment on this, but the only way to actually get somebody is to give of yourself. You can't really get another person unless you know how to empathize. You can't really understand what somebody else is going through unless you have the ability to be aware and be empathetic. I mean, that really is at the end of the day kind of what it's all about. You've got to, right? And I love Shawn Hall's made a comment here. I'm going to put up on the screen for those that are listening. Losing yourself in the service of others is fulfilling and rewarding for me. And that's how I think a lot of people feel. And a lot of men may be resistant, actually say those things. They may not, or they may know it intuitively, but not have the awareness or the evolution to articulate it like Shawn has done. And I think but that goes hand in hand with what I was just saying, that your ability to get somebody else is tied to your ability to be empathetic. Right? Otherwise, you're like, I don't understand that. Why does that person say that? Why would that person say that? I don't understand that. That's being totally closed off.
Yeah. Yeah, most definitely. But again, it all comes back to the questions too, because if that's not, who you are, there's so much value in asking the question honestly too. And then the other thing I was going to say is that goes back to being curious, again, being more childlike and less childish. Because one thing, if I start asking you questions, you can kind of tell too. If I'm asking you questions just to be in your business versus
Yeah.
I'm asking questions because I care, because I'm concerned, because I hope to discover something that we have in common. You can see that a mile away. People know that. People sense it. And so, again, that goes back to, well, what will people think if I ask this question? Should I put myself out there? Should I don't really want to do that. I'm going to go about my business and do what I do and, go home. And it's interesting. I posted this on social media. We have a neighbor who, when we first, bought our home and moved into our place, he stood in the driveway, held his hands out, and yelled from across the street, "Welcome!" Like he was Mr. Rourke on Fantasy Island or something. I was just like, that just meant so much to me. And I was like, I made sure that when I wrote little Christmas cards for the neighbors, that I would, make sure that he got one. And I noticed that he lives alone. There's some like health issues here and there. He doesn't come out of the house, that often. And I was trying to get my son dressed for school. My wife had already left to take our daughter to work, and Elijah was just like really obstinate about not going to school. And I'm thinking, in the middle of it all, having a 10 o'clock client appointment and him taking forever because there isn't a concept of time with his autism. He's got to go through his routines. But in this case, he's just like, he just doesn't want to get dressed as a fight. I'm thinking I'm in the middle of the greatest fight and the greatest challenge on earth. There's no problem in this world that is greater than the one I am facing right then and there. So let that tell you something too. As being conscious or woke is something that has to be intentional, because as much as I try to be, within that moment, I'm thinking I'm going through something and nobody else knows. And I hear sort of a cry, so to speak, like from, outside. I hear like, and my sliding glass door is closed. And so I open it, I look out, and I don't see anything. I look out of my balcony, I don't see anything. But then I notice that his garage is open, my neighbor, and I hear him on the speakerphone saying, "I've fallen, I'm in my garage, and I can't get out." And my first thought was, all right, he's got 911. They're on the way. He's going to be okay. Because if I go over there to try and help him, I got to, is Elijah going to want to go with me? Is he going to, I'm dealing with one thing here at a time. But then I thought, all right, he's conscious and he sounds fine, but what if he's not? What if I didn't go over there and, what if they take a while to get there? So I explained to him, look, I'm going to go across the street. I'll be right back. Now, he was so focused on not getting dressed that his response was like, okay. He had no problem at all.
Yeah.
So needless to say, I went over there and I got to know my neighbor just a little more, waited till the paramedics came and everything. And as they came and they were working on him and making sure he was okay, I stood in his driveway and I looked across the street at my house, and I had a different perspective, literally and figuratively. Looking at my house from his driveway, it didn't look like a different house, but it was a different view. I also then had a different view of my own situation, which seemed like anything but a problem at that moment. So I'm saying all that to say that as much as I want to give and help and everything, I had a selfish moment where I just wasn't sure, and I would say give in to the notion, listen to the notion that tells you to make sure that someone's okay, and do that anyway, because it was something that made a difference, and he was embarrassed, but he deeply appreciated it. And so I say all that to say that that's a work in progress, and we need to be a work in progress.
I think that's kind of the point of this, is that the podcast, the effort, the work that we do is, we're a bit on the evolved scale, in that we know we are a work in progress. If I were the most perfect person in the world, there's nothing to work on, but
right.
Clearly I'm not, and there's more to work on, and there's more to do, because we're all a work in progress until the end.
Yep.
And as always, yeah, they were like I can't believe how quickly this time goes by. For those who have sat with this, thank you for your comments, thank you for your likes and your messages of love. Mimi, great to see you in comment form here as well. Joe, as always, and Shawn Hall, and for other contributors, thank you so much for your contribution. And as we wrap up, and we're going to talk in the next few weeks about ending this year and looking to the future, to next year. This world, I said this in an event last night, where we were in January of last year and thinking about where we were going to be for the year. I don't think anybody would have predicted what 2021 was going to look like in any form. And I don't think it even halfway through the year. So we don't really know what 2022 is going to look like. But as we start to prep for, no matter when it is, at the end of the year, it's always good to take stock in the year that you've just completed and look at what the next year is going to look like. And because we're work in progress and because we're always doing something, hopefully we'll have more of these kinds of conversations, and people will contribute, share, tell us comments tell us subjects that you guys would like us to talk about. We're going to have some guests on the show, and also to let y'all know that, as we've said this whole episode, wherever you are, empathy and love, look at somebody's situation from an empathetic perspective. You don't know what they're going through, what they're doing, before you judge. Take a step to be generous in your spirit and be empathetic, and know if you could look at the world through, the lenses of love, the world would look a lot different. So empathy and love, it's always the way I like to end the show. Shawn, I always love having these conversations with you. We're going to have a guest in the coming weeks, but this was just an opportunity for us to just talk about friendship and brotherhood. And I love being in this world with you, my friend and my brother. And thank you for your contribution. And Shawn Hall, thank you as well. I'm going to post his last comment here, and then you can sign us off. He said, mistakes are just that, missed takes. I love that, missed takes, but we're able to get back up and have another take at it. That's absolutely right. It's mistakes in our lives just give us an opportunity to correct that and get back to path. So thank you for that, Shawn Hall. Shawn Francis, I'll let you end this episode and close us out here.
I want to thank everybody that took the time to listen. And I want to encourage anyone that is listening. If you never know the ways in which you will impact people, or the ways in which you can impact people. You will have virtually no impact on anyone if you don't ever dare to try. And so don't delude yourself into thinking that you need to be an expert on something before you share a solution, or that you need to have it all figured out, because I could be blessed with the gift of living till the age of 500 and not aging between now and then, and I still will never learn everything. And essentially what it comes down to is, you can simply say, here's what I've figured out so far. It worked for me. Maybe you want to give that a try. You don't have to be the expert. But remember, somebody someplace needs to know that you love them. They need to know that you care. There's no such thing as special needs. There are only human needs. We all need to know that we're seen, loved, and that we matter. And I want to thank the women in my life, without whom I couldn't attempt to be who I strive to be. That would be my mother, Jan Francis, and my amazing wife, Laura. And if you're watching this, wherever you are, and you're within the sound of my voice, we love you.
Thank you all. We'll see you again next week on Just Two Dads. Appreciate you all. Take care.